Good afternoon. I'm Neil Bradley, Executive Vice President and Chief Policy Officer at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for joining us today for our event on organized retail crime. All across America, you turn on your local news or your national news, and on most days, you're likely to see a story about brazen robberies in daylight, in the middle of the night, frankly, all times of the day and the week, into our nation's retail stores, mom and pop corner stores, bodegas in New York, pharmacy chains, national retail chains, grocery stores. It has become a virtual epidemic across this country. And it impacts businesses and communities of all sizes. Recent research from our friends at the National Retail Federation indicate that organized retail theft costs companies about $700,000, $700,000 for every $1 billion in sales. Small businesses are impacted as well. Recent surveys indicate that a majority of small businesses have reported an uptick in shoplifting and organized theft in the last year alone. These, of course, are not victimless crimes. In some cases, astonishingly, these robberies have turned violent, putting routine people who just wanted to do their job and showed up for work, lives and health and safety in danger. In other cases, it means the prices that you and I pay, that law abiding citizens pay for the things that we buy every day, go up even higher, offsetting those losses from all of that theft. And if you saw the news recently, more reports of stores closing locations because of the increases in theft. That means lost services to a community and lost jobs and the people who used to work there. At the Chamber, we believe that this epidemic of organized retail theft requires a comprehensive solution, that it needs federal action and state action and local action to confront it and to reverse this epidemic. Today, we're going to spend some time talking about both the impact of organized retail theft, what has allowed this recent rise to occur, and what those actions are that might be taken by local officials, state officials, and federal officials to address that. In a moment, you'll hear from Shannon Pemberthy, the Vice President for Federal Government Relations at CVS, who's going to talk about her stores and her chain's experience with organized retail theft. But first, we're going to hear from a real leader who is on the ground in her community fighting back and bringing these organized retail theft rings to justice. I am honored to be joined by DA Summer Stevens, the San Diego County District Attorney. She also happens to be the Vice President of the National District Attorneys Association and was named one of the top 5 prosecutors in the United States by the Manhattan Institute. She is really, as we've studied her work in San Diego and talked to our partners on the ground there, this is someone who's not sitting back and watching what's happening, not just talking about it. She's taking real action. So, DA Stephen, thank you for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing well, Neil Bradley. It's great to be with you again and with the U.S. Chamber. Thank you for all you're doing. It's an honor to join you today.
So let's start with the lay of the land. What have you seen in San Diego County and from your perch there across California? How bad is the problem of organized retail theft? What are some of the drivers? And then we can turn in a moment to talking about what you're doing about it. But how bad is the problem and what are you seeing?
Well, the problem has gotten worse and worse. San Diego County, we serve 3.3 million people. We're the 5th largest county in the United States. And we live across from Los Angeles, and we have a lot of activity in San Diego, a lot of business, a lot of stores, small and big. We've seen this problem increase. This has been a priority for me, listening to my community, going out, talking to the small businesses, the large businesses, understanding the impact on them, and then translating that into solutions and action. But you're asking me about what the drivers are. The drivers really come down to money and profit. Crime, whether it's selling drugs, whether it's gangs, whether it is selling human beings and human trafficking, or whether it's organized retail theft, it depends on money and profit. And the profit is really become something expansive because of the online marketplaces that allow the stolen goods to be sold. So this has really increased the thefts because of the profit margin.
So, when I was growing up, I have to say, kind of pre-internet and pre-online marketplaces. In the town I grew up in, we had pawn shops like most of the rest of the country. And I remember growing up learning that if you took something to a pawn shop, they required basic information because without that information of who was dropping off goods, you had a risk of stolen goods kind of showing up there. And the government kind of stepped in and said, you know what, we want to cut this as an avenue off for the sale of stolen goods. Do we need to think about online marketplaces maybe in the same way and kind of modernizing the approach that we used to take to pawn shops and applying it to these online marketplaces to cut off an avenue for selling those goods? Is that one way we should be thinking about this?
That's absolutely right. To the thieves and to the criminals, there is no difference between whether they're taking it to a pawn shop or they're taking it to an online marketplace in terms of the activity, except that now in pawn shops, there is documentation as to their identity. They have to show some documentation that allows law enforcement to act. When I prosecuted America's Most Wanted thief that was stealing high-end items, it was not that complicated to be able to build a case because we were able to track the activity through pawn shops, through different IDs, even fake IDs, seeing the similarities and being able to put a case together. There is no real requirement of any kind for online selling of stolen goods. This is what allows this retail theft to continue to grow at the cost of businesses and the cost of people. I really invite everybody to talk to the people that work in these stores. A lot of them are mothers. Many of the workers are women that are looking to help their families, grow their families, and they're terrified at this point. So we need to take action and we need to treat the online marketplaces in the same way. If they are allowing stolen goods, then they need to stop. And the only way in a country of laws to stop it is to have laws that hold people accountable.
Well, at the U.S. Chamber, we've endorsed legislation that would do just that. It's called the Inform Act. It's pending in Congress. This is actually one of the things that we can do on the federal level because, of course, the internet doesn't stop at county lines or state lines. It's pretty ubiquitous. And so this is kind of a role of the federal government of applying those age-old principles and laws to new technologies. And we're actually quite hopeful that we might be able to see that bipartisan piece of legislation, the Inform Act, enacted before the end of this Congress. I want to turn to another cause, but before I do, I want to invite members of our audience to submit questions. You'll see on your screen a place where you can submit your questions as we go through a few more questions with the district attorney. Then we'll turn to your questions from the audience. But DA Steve, I want to turn to another driver, and I'm going to ask you to address something that our members say they've seen in some of their stores. And it's literally folks coming in with a calculator and ringing up the cost of the goods that they're stealing off of the shelves because they know that in whatever jurisdiction they happen to be in, what the threshold is in which they'll be prosecuted for that theft. And we've seen over the last 2 decades, I think it's something like 40 states raise that threshold. Is kind of this, for lack of a better term, safe harbor against prosecution, or an increased safe harbor against prosecution. Is that one of the drivers? And are there things that we can do to address those people who are literally calculating up how much they're stealing? or those folks who do that and then come back to another store the very same day and do the same thing again.
Yeah, Neil, all of these issues are connected. The rampant theft, the habitual thief who's coming in with a calculator and making sure it's under $950. That seems to be the number that 40 states or so settled on. And many states like ours don't allow aggregation. So a person can go to different stores and you can't aggregate the amount to show that it's more than $950. The intent of the law was for the one-time thief who comes in and is looking for food or something like that, which of course stealing is not good no matter what, but that was the intent. But it was absolutely taken advantage of, as we thought it would, by those serial thieves and criminals who now use it in order to steal every day of the week, on and on and on, and subject these stores to massive losses, but also subject the employees to fear because they don't know what to do. They don't know if they try to stop the person, whether the person is going to have a weapon, which increasingly we are seeing weapons being pulled, pepper spray, knives, guns, and the like. And so they are in a catch 22, and this allows it to continue day after day. And for prosecutors, it is a big challenge. I've tried to change the law to make it where if you have three offenses, you've been released on bail or on your own recognizance and continue the activity, that you are handled at a higher level, which of course makes a lot of sense. But once a law passes that is doesn't have limits as to priors, as to prior conduct, as to habitual offenders, it's hard to get it off the books.
So we have seen some states, blue and red states, Florida and Illinois, for example, making moves on this aggregation issue and adopting some of the reforms, DA Stephen, you just talked about. Are you hopeful that we're going to make progress in kind of more states, maybe even your home state of California, on these issues?
We're certainly going to keep fighting for it because it is the right thing to do. This is being taken advantage of. It is a loophole that is causing a lot of damage, and it can be balanced with allowing second chances for first time offenders, but not doing so in a way that promotes crime, allowing it for people who choose to continue to commit crime. We are seeing more progress in terms of our organized retail theft statutes, which we've used, I'm proud to say, in San Diego in 99 cases and have gotten already 67 convictions. And it's when two or more people go in and they conspire and they commit a theft, which we call organized retail theft, we're able to bring more accountability.
That's fantastic. So policy obviously has to be a part of this, but then we need people on the ground, police and district attorneys who are taking advantage of the tools that they've been given. You've done some pretty creative work organizing the district attorney's office, police, and business in a kind of a collective effort to take on organized retail theft. Can you tell us a little bit about what those efforts look like?
Well, I definitely recommend it because when we come together, and what we have in San Diego is Orca, not the whale, although it's a whale of a collaboration where organized crime alliance, retail alliance comes together, law enforcement, businesses, retail, small and big, prosecutors. I have a specialized prosecutor and investigator assigned that really understand these cases and what they mean to people. What you said, that these aren't victimless crimes, these are important crimes that mean a lot to people, to the community at large, to the people working in those stores, to businesses, and to the whole of the community. They come together and they put all of the evidence together, the images, because these thieves, they travel and they continue their crime. They're not going to just hit one Ulta store or CVS. they're going to continue because they've made profit off of one to the other one. So if we can put all of the video evidence together, all of the images, all of the descriptions, an image, a story emerges. In one case, and this made it very clear that San Diego is not a place to come for retail theft. We were able to bring together all these cases using our Orca Alliance for a $700,000 theft, and was able to put a stop to that conspiracy, and were able to bring heavy accountability in that case under our organized retail theft statutes.
And I know your office in particular has made a point of having folks who outreach to the business community. And I think that kind of collaboration and the ability to form those relationships, almost to form the relationship before you need the relationship, is certainly critical. We've gotten a question from our audience that I think is particularly astute, that I'm curious as to your opinion on. It does seem like that the pandemic produced a major surge in organized retail theft. From your perspective, is that right, or were the trend lines on the up trajectory before the pandemic? And what kind of explains what we're seeing, what we've been seeing since the onset of the pandemic?
Well, we are seeing a trajectory upwards, although it began before the pandemic because of the weakened laws and loopholes that people took advantage of, unfortunately. But also, we saw during the pandemic that more and more people were buying online. And because of that, it allowed for thefts to increase because you're able to hide your stolen product, take it to the higher up fence, and be able to sell it quickly, getting it out of your hands online. So with people all going more online, we did see that the message went out. In addition, we had a lot of emergency bail schedules, zero bail schedules, which also the criminals got the memo that they're not going to stay in jail because of the COVID conditions, and some of them took advantage of it, of that. Unfortunately, we also saw some, prosecutors put out messages that here's a list of crimes that we won't prosecute. And, again, people who, bad actors, read those and continue to commit crimes and increase their crimes. We have to uphold the rule of law and work with our community. We have Cameron Celeste and others that are amazing out every day talking to our community, to our business owners about the impact on them. And when you hear those stories, you make sure that you are doing your job and that you're prioritizing making the community safe, which is our job.
So we've gotten another question from the audience. I think I had mentioned earlier that I think it's something like 40 states in the last 2 decades have raised those felony levels. States are beginning to adopt policies like you described earlier to either do aggregation or repeat offenses. Should there also be reconsideration of those felony levels? And is there a level that you've seen in your work that might be most appropriate?
I don't think it's about setting a number. More, it's really about the repeat offenders. So the laws need to reflect the first time person that makes a bad mistake, and they need to reflect a person who chooses a lifestyle where they're taking advantage of other people and stealing day after day and terrorizing the community. There has to be a difference between the habitual and non-habitual. We had a $450 level that seemed to be a better level, but the law also reflected that if you have three or more of those, even if it's under 450, you are going to go up to a felony level. So setting an amount, but also setting a law that reflects whether the level of criminality that you are really important. We also need more laws on the organized retail theft to meet the moment. And we need laws that allow us to prosecute in one location all of the jurisdictions where the same crew, the same gang, if you will, committed other thefts. This is a very important provision that lapsed in California, and we need it back where our office is able to take cases from other counties where the same criminal organization has wreaked havoc. That's super important. We also need laws that bring funding for task forces. In San Diego, we work with the CHP, the California Highway Patrol, and they're fantastic at helping us with the statewide efforts.
It makes a lot of sense. It's sometimes we try to oversimplify things in numbers, but it really is thinking about the problem that you're trying to solve and the comprehensive ways of addressing it. DAC, I have one last question before we let you go. I mentioned at the top that you're the vice president of the National District Attorneys Association. So I know you work with district attorneys all across the United States. At the chamber, we work with businesses all across the United States. What's the advice that we should be giving to businesses, both those tuned in today and our members, about how they should be working with their local district attorney to tackle this problem?
Yeah, working with NDAA, we've really focused on this message of rebuilding the trust. NDAA has been doing a lot with RELA and working on this issue and learning from each other. But the thing that I just told my businesses that I visited in San Isidro this week is don't give up. Keep reporting, because unfortunately some businesses gave up on reporting because during the pandemic the booking criteria and everything else had changed. My message is don't give up. You deserve safety. You deserve law enforcement to respond and prosecutors to prosecute. Continue to report. Invest in cameras that are able to capture the images so we can do our investigation, and make sure that you help us build these cases so that we can make everyone safe.
Well, DA Stephen, thank you so much. That is great advice for our members, and we'll be working to follow through on that. Thank you for your leadership, both there in San Diego and across the country. And we are deeply appreciative for your time this afternoon.
Honored to be with you. Thank you.
Okay, that was a fantastic discussion. And perhaps most important coming out of it is this sense that there actually are solutions, and they can be bipartisan in nature, adopted in blue states and red states, and even in what seems a perpetually divided Washington. So, we have to get to work to implement those solutions, but clearly there's a pathway forward. I think the pathway forward is going to be particularly good news to hear for our next guest. I mentioned that Shannon Penbarthy is the Vice President for Federal Government Affairs at CVS. She's joining us today to talk about what it's like for a retailer who is seeing this in their locations all across the country. Shannon, thank you for joining us today.
And thank you, Neil, for the opportunity to be here and to talk about this important issue.
So I'm going to start by just asking your reflections on what we just heard from the district attorney. Does that resonate with you? Is that similar to the problems that you're seeing and maybe some of the solutions that you're thinking about there at CVS?
Absolutely. We could not have made the progress that we've made to date without the partnerships that we've had with other retailers, with the chambers, and most importantly, with law enforcement at all levels. We've seen the DAs in particular spearhead these task forces that the DA Stefan spoke about. They've been really critical as a nexus to bring information together. And what we've seen is when we get the community sharing that information, you're able to make these connections that results in law enforcement being able to do their job to protect people and bring build cases, and bring them through to prosecutions, as she mentioned. A really great track record there in San Diego.
So I want to take a step back and talk about the scope of the problem just in your business's stores. You've shared some, frankly, stunning statistics about the increase in theft and how frequently a theft occurs at one of CVS's stores. Give us those numbers and help us understand the context of how widespread this is for just one business's chain of stores.
Sure. So as I think also as the DA mentioned, I mean, organized retail crime existed prior to the pandemic, but certainly the rush to have more demand coming from online purchases during the pandemic has really seen a dramatic increase. We estimate that organized retail crime occurs about every 3 minutes in one of our 10,000 locations across the country. It truly is, it has just grown in magnitude. And I would add, it's as she also noted, it's become more brazen as this activity goes on in the stores.
It has become more brazen, at least what we see in the news. What's that like for your clerks and for your store employees, and how has it changed their jobs? I mean, once every 3 minutes, I mean, that feels to me like something that all of your employees are having to at least prepare for or grapple with, even if it's not their store that it's happening to today, but that it's likely to happen to soon enough. How is this impacting your employees?
So certainly they are more alert to what's going on. Obviously we have training programs in place. The partnerships with the local law enforcement are really important. I think that, we've also looked at, a lot of what the DA spoke about is what we call the boosters, the individuals who are being directed by highly organized, highly coordinated organizations to come in and still, sometimes you actually now see them with a list. They've been told what products to steal. For every booster we take down, those organizations are just going to put another booster in place. So we have tended to focus a lot of our efforts on tracking who are they working for. So when that booster leaves our store, maybe they hit a few other stores along the way, who are they depositing those products with? How are they being paid? Is it drugs? Is it money? And then where do those products go? Because we believe if we can cut off the demand through like the legislation that we've talked about that would put some additional requirements on the ability to so easily sell these stolen and counterfeit products online. If we can start to address that end of it, you're going to see this activity diminish in the storefronts. And so I would say from a CVS Health perspective, that's where we tend to put our focus. That's where we work with law enforcement, is bringing those bigger cases and building the pieces at the local level that make prosecution of those individuals that are higher up in the chain, if you will, because that's where we see the real impact.
So Shannon, we talked a little bit about in the last segment about the Inform Act, and I think we're all supportive of that to deal with the ability of criminals to reduce the ability of criminals to sell on online marketplaces. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about maybe some state level reforms. Is there particular legislative proposals that you have seen that might make a difference, or that you're talking to state legislators and government officials about?
Of course. I think as one of the things that we needed to do at the very beginning was just to raise awareness about what organized retail crime really is, that it's not a single event in a single store, that it is a much bigger, highly coordinated criminal activity, directed activity. There are thousands of participants across the country, and it is truly a nationwide level. It happens in every state, in every jurisdiction, and we'll track product that's stolen in one state and it's being shipped to a warehouse in a different state. It's really remarkable, this network. Then what we've seen as we've raised that awareness is, in addition to the Inform Act, which we are very hopeful will make its way into law this year, the states have also picked up on that. And so Inform-like legislation was in play in more than 30 states this year. We've had 12 states sign an Inform-like bill into law just this year. And again, it creates some accountability. It makes it harder for these criminals to hide. There's the need to be verified to participate in the marketplace. Also providing post-transaction information, contact information to a consumer so that they have recourse. We talk about the impact on retail, and certainly we're very concerned about the safety of our employees and also the customers in our stores, but also the impact to consumers who unknowingly are purchasing these products that may have been tampered with, expired, fraudulent, in many cases counterfeit products, and there's a real harm and economic impact there as well.
Yeah, and just for our audience, I mean, the things that Shannon's talking about in the Inform Act, it really is, it's not for a person who's selling a one-off item on eBay or something like that. You're talking about larger transactions where there are lots of transactions being sold, and making sure that you know who's selling those items and how to reach them, and just kind of basic contact information. We discussed with the DA, the very things that we often require of brick and mortar stores, where it's likely that a stolen good might attempt to be resold. Stephanie, we have a question from our audience that I'd love to ask you, and that is, how has CVS had to respond in terms of product placements, your store operations, because of this increase in organized retail theft?
So there's a number of, I will say, aversive procedures we do undertake. If you've been in one of our stores, you might have seen occasionally some of the product behind a locked case. That's something we don't like to do because it limits access for all consumers. But in some cases, we found that that's necessary. You'll see certain high dollar value goods might be placed further away from the door, or in areas of the store that are more easily and directly monitored by staff or through our cameras.
Yeah, so it's not just, we talked about the non-victimless nature of this crime, that we're all kind of victims for it, but it's making all of our shopping, I frequent your CVS stores. I've noticed that some things I like to buy are just a little bit harder, that I have to get to the clerk's assistants to get that. And I'm sure that in and of itself has costs for CVS in terms of your own operations. I'm curious, you all have been at CVS the front and center in this, both in experiencing the increase in organized retail theft, as you said, an event every 3 minutes, but also thinking about how to respond to it. Do you have any advice for the businesses and business leaders who are tuning in today about how they might think about what they should do internally to begin either adapting their operations or engaging to help address this threat?
Of course, I think obviously diligence is important, but I would echo the advice that was passed along by DA Stefan in terms of educating yourself on what are proactive asset protection, loss prevention activities that might be applicable to your stores or setting. And then getting engaged in these organized retail crime task forces that are being set up. I think, nearly a dozen states now have set up task forces, and many local jurisdictions as well. And then being engaged with your local chamber and if applicable, the retail association. But both are very attuned to these issues right now. They can provide a lot of assistance, not only on the kind of best practices for your business, but also how to get involved in the advocacy component. We need both law enforcement and lawmakers to hear from you about the importance of continuing to address this issue. We think the Inform Act is an important and big step in that direction, but there'll be plenty more work to do after that's finally enacted.
Talk a little bit about it, because one of the questions we've just gotten from the audience is what CVS does at the local level. What do those relationships look like? And for a major operation like CVS, is this something where the store manager is really engaged with local law enforcement and with the retail and business organizations that you just spoke about?
So we tend to have this activity focused through our asset protection teams. They are well trained, highly sophisticated, often former law enforcement themselves, and so they tend to be the ones who take the lead on this activity, both in actions within the stores, but also in the partnerships that we have with law enforcement. And then, working to bring these cases forward so they can be prosecuted.
So we talked about some of the progress that's being made. The DA mentioned some progress in some states, and you've mentioned the work that's being done in some localities. In states and localities where both lawmakers and law enforcement, as you said, have kind of taken this seriously, have you seen an impact for your stores and operations in those jurisdictions?
Absolutely. It is definitely made a difference. And I think, again, we needed to, again, just raise the awareness and kind of explain what organized retail crime really is all about. Again, not a singular event in a single store, but again, really highly coordinated, directed activity, organizations that are, national, multinational in some cases, and once we were able to help others see how those pieces fit together, they started to realize the importance of being able to take action at a local level. Again, it's like building blocks. So each time we get one piece of information, it leads us to lots of other places. And again, focusing on where we're going to have the biggest impact, and that often is tracing this all the way back to the bigger bosses, to the bigger people up the chain who are directing the activity. That's where we see the biggest impact and have had our biggest successes. But we need everyone engaged to do that. Those big busts that you read about in the papers and see on the news are the results of sometimes months of effort, partnerships with other retailers, and then again, law enforcement at all levels.
Shane, you just mentioned we talked about this earlier about the localized level and then across state lines, but you just mentioned multinational, that in some instances, these organized criminal rings are in fact multinational. Does that require a special focus? And is this maybe something where federal law enforcement is going to have to step up its engagement to help, as you say, target kind of the center locus or the folks who are driving the demand for these thieves?
Absolutely, and they are engaged at every level.
Yeah, so it's the more we peel this back, it's not just a local problem in one jurisdiction. It's a county problem, a state problem, a national problem, as you point out, an international problem. I want to give you the final word, if you will, on any advice that you would give to our audience today, or anything that they might be able to do to be helpful, either in persuading Congress or our state lawmakers or law enforcement officials to help us tackle this organized retail theft.
Certainly, thank you for that opportunity. We focused a lot today on retail. That's because that's what CVS Health is a large retailer. But I also don't want to understate the impact of counterfeits in this area and how they impact virtually every business as well. The peddling of potentially fraudulent or products is quite troubling and has a huge impact on consumers as well, and on the economy. If anything that we've heard today, really was compelling, resonated with you, I really encourage you to be in touch with the chamber and your retail associations, that they can give you information on how to get engaged. We really could use your voice right now to get federal legislation, the Inform Act, through this year. We feel like we're in the best position we could be in, but given where we are with Congress and the election year, every voice helps. So I really would encourage you to engage there. so that we can have this as a national standard.
Well, Shannon, thank you so much for joining us. And to our audience, thank you for joining us as well. I hope you found this as informative as we have. As Shannon mentioned, there is work to do at the federal level, at the state level, and the local level. And so if I could summarize it, it's real simple. We need Congress to pass the Inform Act. We need to cut off the route that many of these stolen goods are being resold through. Second, we need states to act. We need to give law enforcement and prosecutors the tools that DA Stephan talked about so that they can prosecute both those who are organizing these retail crime rings and those who are carrying out the theft, to make sure that people don't use the levels and the lack of aggregation to evade responsibility. And then three, we have to work with those local law enforcement officials and prosecutors to make sure that from the business community, they have the support and the evidence they need to make the cases against those who aren't just stealing from our stores. They are wreaking havoc in our communities, causing real physical and mental harm to people who are just showing up every day, trying to do their jobs, ultimately raising costs for all of us, and sadly, in many instances, causing stores that local communities rely on and that people rely on for jobs to close. So thank you so much for joining us today. Go to uschamber.com. That's uschamber.com if you're interested in learning more about this subject. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.